My name is Elizabeth Sterling. I spent 35 years as a judge, a life dedicated to the meticulous evaluation of evidence and the discernment of truth from falsehood. I believe that every story had a single, verifiable narrative. My own life was a story I thought I knew well: a quiet retirement, a loving son, and a picture-perfect daughter-in-law. That narrative was a lie, a masterpiece of fiction so audacious I still struggle to comprehend its scope. My daughter-in-law, Sophia, the devoted wife to my son, was not one woman but two. I discovered she had hired her own long-lost identical twin sister to play her part in our quiet suburban life, acting as a devoted wife and caregiver, while the real Sophia traveled the world with a rich lover, funding her lavish lifestyle by systematically draining my family's fortune. My awakening began with a small, impossible clue that led me to the truth, a truth so monstrous it would force me to become the presiding judge in the most important and devastating case of my entire life. Before the arrival of the two Sophias, my life was a portrait of serene, scholarly retirement. My beautiful historic home in a wealthy New England suburb was my sanctuary, a place filled with the books and memories of a long, happy marriage to my late husband, Richard, a fellow man of the law. Since his passing, my world had become smaller, its focus narrowed to a single bright point: my son, Arthur. Arthur was a good man, a brilliant but gentle soul who had inherited my late husband's intellect, but none of his assertive drive. An art history professor at the local university, he was more comfortable in the quiet, dusty archives of the past than in the sharp-elbowed world of the present. His life had been a series of quiet disappointments, both professionally and personally, and I, his mother, had always been his staunchest defender and his softest place to land. My love for him was a vast, protective, and, as I would learn, dangerously unconditional thing. He was adrift, a man in need of an anchor, and then he found Sophia. He met her at a university gala, and he came home a man resurrected. She was, he told me, a brilliant art curator, an independent consultant with a roster of wealthy European clients. She was beautiful, vibrant, and she understood his passion for art with a depth that electrified him. When I met her, I understood his adoration. Sophia was a masterpiece. She was not just beautiful, she was luminous, with a radiant smile and a confident, easy grace that was utterly captivating. She was the perfect partner for my son, her vibrant energy a perfect counterbalance to his quiet nature. She seemed to see the brilliant, passionate man I always knew he was, buried beneath his quiet exterior. She did not just love him, she seemed to be completing him. I was not just happy for him, I was profoundly grateful. They married in a whirlwind, a beautiful, tasteful ceremony in our garden. Their happiness was a warm sun that seemed to banish the last shadows of my own grief. They lived with me, a practical arrangement that made perfect sense. Arthur's salary as a professor was modest, and Sophia's work as a consultant, she explained, involved long periods of research and writing, which she could easily do from home. Sophia was the perfect wife, the perfect daughter-in-law. She was a loving, attentive partner to Arthur, a source of constant encouragement and support. She was a warm and gracious presence in my home, always thoughtful, always kind. She would insist on cooking elaborate meals, filling the house with the aromas of her travels. She would sit with me for hours, listening with rapt attention to my old stories of the courtroom. Her career was, by all accounts, a dazzling success. She would have intense, hushed phone calls in French and Italian with her clients in Geneva and Florence. She would spend long hours in the study, surrounded by art books and auction catalogs. And then, for a week or two every few months, she would travel: a research trip to the Prado in Madrid, a private client viewing in Paris. Arthur would miss her terribly, but he was also immensely proud of her. He was married to a brilliant worldly woman. We were a happy, cultured, and loving family. It was a beautiful, perfect story, and it was a complete and utter lie. The first signs of the deception were so small, so seemingly insignificant, that I dismissed them as oddities, as tricks of my own aging mind. They were tiny, dissonant notes in a perfect symphony. There was the matter of her tastes, the Sophia who loved to cook with me, her hands dusty with flour as we made pasta, claimed to despise spicy food. But one evening, after a long day of writing, the Sophia who emerged from the study ordered a fiery Thai curry for dinner, devouring it with a relish that was startling. "I must have just been in the mood," she said with a laugh when I pointed it out. There was her knowledge. The Sophia who was an expert on the Italian Renaissance would, on another day, seem to have no memory of a conversation we had had about a specific Botticelli painting. "Oh, my mind is such a sieve these days," she would say, with a charming, self-deprecating smile. There were physical tells, a tiny mole on her left shoulder blade, one I had noticed one summer afternoon by the pool, seemed to have vanished a week later. A faint silvery scar above her right eyebrow, the result of a childhood tumble, was there on a Tuesday and gone by Friday. I mentioned these things to Arthur gently, cautiously. He looked at me with a pained, worried expression. "Mom," he said softly, "you have been under a lot of stress since Dad died. Maybe you're just a little confused." The gaslighting was not even her own. It was mine. I began to question my own perceptions. Was I so lonely that I was inventing strange, paranoid fantasies? Was I becoming the one thing I had always dreaded, an unreliable narrator of my own life? The real pressure began when Arthur's university department faced a series of brutal budget cuts. His position, once secure, was suddenly precarious. At the same time, Sophia's consulting business, she claimed, was hit by a downturn in the European art market. Their once comfortable financial situation became a source of constant, simmering stress. It was Sophia, of course, who had the solution. She called a family meeting, her face a mask of loving, practical concern. "I have been doing a deep dive into our finances," she began, her voice calm and authoritative. "And the reality is, we are living beyond our means. This house," she said, gesturing to the beautiful, antique-filled room, "is our biggest asset, but it is also our biggest liability. It is a treasure chest, but the treasure is locked up." She proposed a plan. We should sell a few of the non-essential pieces from my late husband's art collection. We should also take out a substantial line of credit against the value of the house. The money, she explained, would not be for us to live on. It would be for her to invest. "I have an inside track on a new art investment fund," she said, her eyes gleaming with a familiar, brilliant confidence. "The returns are staggering. This is not about saving money, Elizabeth. It is about making it. We can secure our futures, all of us, for life. It is the smart, logical thing to do." Arthur, desperate and completely in awe of his wife's financial acumen, was her greatest advocate. "Mom, she is a genius at this," he would plead with me in private. "We have to trust her. This is our one big chance to get ahead, to finally be secure." My own financial situation was perfectly stable. I did not need the money, but they were not asking for my sake. They were asking for Arthur's, for the family's. They were using my love for my son, my desire to see him happy and secure, as leverage. My quiet, peaceful home had become the headquarters of a relentless pressure campaign. The moment the lie began to truly unravel was an accident, a piece of mundane, everyday carelessness. Sophia had just left for a 10-day research trip to London. She had kissed Arthur goodbye, her face a mask of loving sadness at their temporary parting. "I will miss you every second," she had said. 2 hours after she had left for the airport, I went into the study to retrieve a book. And there, on the floor beside the desk, was her wallet. She had forgotten it. My first thought was a simple, practical one: to call her, to arrange to have it sent to her hotel in London. I opened the wallet to find her driver's license, to confirm her full legal name. And that is when I saw it. Tucked into a hidden pocket behind the credit card slots was a second driver's license. The picture was of Sophia, the same flawless face, the same brilliant smile. But the name was different. The name on the license was Clara Collins, and the address was not our quiet suburban street. It was an address for a small, nondescript apartment building in a different, much less affluent part of the city. I stood in the silence of the study, my heart a frantic, hammering drum in my chest. Sophia Collins, Clara Collins. 2 names, 2 addresses, 1 face. My mind, the judge's mind, the mind trained to see the flaw in the perfect alibi, began to race. The different tastes, the forgotten conversations, the disappearing mole. It was not my memory that was failing. It was my reality. I did not call her. I did not tell Arthur. I took a high-resolution photograph of the second license with my own phone, and then I put the wallet back, exactly where I had found it. The next day, I feigned a headache and canceled my volunteer shift at the library. And then, I did what I had done for 35 years, when faced with a complex, unbelievable case. I began my own investigation. I drove to the address on Clara Collins's license. It was a shabby, run-down apartment building, a world away from the elegant life Sophia lived with us. I sat in my car across the street for hours, a quiet, invisible observer. I did not know what I was looking for. Just after 3 o'clock, a woman emerged from the building. My breath caught in my throat. It was Sophia, but it was not. She was dressed in simple, worn jeans and a faded t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. There was no makeup, no expensive jewelry. And her face, it was Sophia's face, but it was etched with a weariness, a deep, profound sadness I had never seen on the radiant, confident woman who lived in my home. She walked to the corner and waited for a bus. As she stood there, she looked so small, so ordinary, so real. This was not a performance. The pieces began to click into place with a horrifying, sickening logic. There were two of them, a pair of identical twins. One, the real Sophia, the brilliant, glamorous art curator, was at that very moment, supposedly in London, and the other, her sister Clara, was a stand-in, an actress, playing the part of the devoted wife at home. The entire beautiful story of my son's happy marriage was a fraud, a complex, audacious, and monstrously cruel deception. And I, the retired judge, the expert in truth, had been the star witness for the prosecution of my own family's ruin. The woman living in my house, the woman my son was married to, was a stranger. And her sister, the real Sophia, was a thief who was using her own twin as a tool to rob us blind. I returned home from my secret expedition a different woman. The fog of confusion and self-doubt that had plagued me for months had been burned away by the harsh, clarifying light of the truth. I was not losing my mind. The inconsistencies were not my imagination. Sophia was not one woman, but two. The knowledge was a cold, hard stone in my gut, a terrible secret I now had to carry alone. My perspective shifted from that of a participant to that of an observer, a judge gathering evidence. I began to watch the woman in my house, the stand-in, the actress, with a new, analytical eye. I named her Clara in my mind, the name from the hidden driver's license, and I began to see the 1,000 tiny details that proved my impossible theory was true. Clara's hands, the ones that so gently tended to my son, were rougher, the nails unpolished, the hands of someone who did her own chores. The glamorous Sophia's hands were always perfectly manicured. Clara had a slight, almost imperceptible limp when she was tired, a detail that was completely absent in the jet-setting Sophia. Clara spoke with a softer, less assertive accent. She was also, I began to realize with a sense of profound and complicated pity, a much kinder person. She was genuinely patient with Arthur. She would read to Leo with a warmth and an affection that the real Sophia, in her brief, dazzling appearances, had only ever mimicked. I was living in a house with a stranger who was, in many ways, a better wife and mother than the real one. The surreal nature of my situation was a constant, dizzying torment. I was trapped in a silent, one-woman theater of the absurd, and I was the only one in the audience who knew the lead actress was an imposter. The real Sophia returned from London a week later. The switch was a masterpiece of seamless, practiced deception. Clara, the quiet, weary stand-in, left the house early one morning for a supposed spa day. A few hours later, a taxi pulled up, and Sophia, the queen, made her grand entrance. She was tanned, radiant, and dressed in a stunning new designer outfit. She swept into the house, a whirlwind of glamour and energy, her arms laden with expensive gifts from Harrods and Liberty of London. "I missed you all so much," she cried, her voice a melodic performance of joy as she showered Arthur with kisses and presented Leo with a complex toy. The energy in the house shifted instantly. The quiet, gentle peace of Clara's tenure was replaced by a high-strung, ambitious buzz. And with Sophia's return, the pressure campaign to liquidate my assets began again, this time with a new relentless intensity. The investment fund, she announced, had a closing deadline. Her European partners were getting impatient. She needed the capital from the sale of my art collection, and the line of credit against the house immediately. I tried gently to push back, to use the knowledge I now had as a subtle shield. "Sophia, I was just reading about the volatility of the art market," I would say. "Perhaps now is not the wisest time to sell." This was met with a new, more aggressive form of gaslighting. "Elizabeth, with all due respect," she said, her voice dripping with a condescending pity, You are a retired librarian. I am a professional wealth manager. Please leave the financial strategy to me. Your anxiety is clouding your judgment. She began to actively build a case against my competence. She would hold family meetings with Arthur where she would present complex financial documents, knowing I could not follow them. Then turn to him with a sigh. You see, darling, she is just not capable of understanding these things anymore. It is a burden on her. I knew I could not fight Sophia on her own. She was too smart, too ruthless. I had to get through to my son. I had to believe that the kind, intelligent man I had raised was still in there, buried beneath the dazzling spell she had cast upon him. I waited for a rare moment when Sophia was out of the house. I found Arthur in his study, looking over some papers Sophia had left for him. Arthur, I began, my voice quiet but firm, we need to talk. I am worried about Sophia. I am worried about our finances. He looked up, his face immediately clouding with a familiar defensive frown. Mom, please, do not start. Just listen to me, I pleaded. I did not dare tell him the insane truth about the twins. He would never believe it. It would only serve as proof of my supposed madness. So I stuck to the facts I thought he could grasp. The investment fund she is pressuring us to invest in, it does not exist. I have done my own research. There is no record of it. The returns she is promising are impossible. She is lying to you. He stared at me, his expression shifting from annoyance to a deep, profound, and heartbreaking disappointment. I cannot believe you're doing this, he said, his voice low and tight with anger. I cannot believe you are so determined to see her as the villain. I am trying to protect you, I cried, my voice breaking. No, you are not, he shot back, standing up. You are trying to sabotage my life. Sophia is the best thing that has ever happened to me. She is brilliant, she is successful, and she is trying to build a future for us, for Leo, and you cannot stand it. You are so stuck in the past, so jealous of our happiness that you are making up these insane, paranoid conspiracy theories. The words were a physical blow, each one a dagger. She had prepared him for this. She had already planted the narrative in his mind that I was a jealous, meddling mother who would try to turn him against her. She told me you might do this, he continued, his voice thick with a righteous, wounded anger. She said your grief was making you possessive and irrational. I defended you. I told her she was wrong. But she was not, was she? He shook his head, a look of utter pity on his face. I trust her, Mom, completely. And if you cannot be happy for me, if you cannot support the woman I love, then I do not know what to say to you. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing in the rubble of my own desperate, failed appeal. I had not just failed to save him. I had lost him. He had made his choice, and he had chosen the lie. The confrontation with my son was the final piece of ammunition Sophia needed. My irrational behavior and paranoid accusations were now the perfect pretext for her to execute the legal endgame of her plan. They came to me together 2 days later, on a bleak, gray morning. September 30th, 2025. Their faces were a solemn, united front of loving concern and resolute duty. Mom, Arthur began, his voice devoid of all its former warmth. After your outburst the other day, Sophia and I have come to a very difficult decision. We cannot stand by and watch you descend into this confusion. You are a danger to yourself and to the financial security of this family. Sophia slid a thick stack of legal documents across the coffee table. This is a durable power of attorney, Elizabeth, she said, her voice now cold and clinical, the voice of a professional closing a deal, and the papers to formally establish the family trust. It gives us the legal authority to manage your affairs and your medical care. The lawyers and our doctors agree that this is a necessary step. The lie was breathtaking. Our doctors. They were framing their coup as a medical necessity. I stared at the papers and then at my son's face, searching for a flicker of the boy I had raised. I found none. I saw only a stranger, his eyes hard and his jaw set. And if I refuse to sign, I whispered, then we will have no choice but to petition the court for an emergency conservatorship over you, Arthur said, his voice flat and emotionless. We will present our testimony and the testimony of our doctors about your declining mental state. The court will declare you incompetent, and they will grant us control anyway. This way, he added, his words a final, devastating blow, You at least get to maintain the illusion of your dignity by agreeing to it yourself. It was a brutal, perfect trap. They had used my love to isolate me, and now they were using my supposed madness to incarcerate me legally. To fight them in court now, with no allies and no proof but my own unreliable word, would be a public, humiliating suicide. My lawyer, the retired judge, would have fought. But the mother, the woman who could not bear the thought of a public war against her own son, could not. I was defeated. With a hand that felt like it belonged to a stranger, a hand that was numb and dead, I took the pen and I signed the papers. I signed away my home, my fortune, my legal autonomy. I signed away my own identity. The moment the final signature was on the page, the atmosphere in the room changed. Arthur, unable to look at me, mumbled an excuse and left the room. Sophia gathered the documents, her movements crisp and efficient. The performance was over. She looked at me, her eyes not triumphant, but simply cold, empty, and dismissive. I was no longer a person to her. I was an asset that had been successfully acquired. In the days that followed, my life became a quiet, waking nightmare. I was a prisoner in my own home. Sophia was in absolute control, her authority now legally unassailable. She would have loud, brazen conversations on the phone about the imminent sale of the house and the liquidation of my art collection, as if I were not even there. The two Sophias continued their seamless rotation. The quiet, but sad Clara would play the part of my gentle, dutiful caregiver for a week or two, her eyes full of a pity I now understood was likely for herself. Then she would disappear, and the real Sophia would return from her glamorous travels, her presence a sharp, painful reminder of the monstrous lie that was at the heart of my life. The pain of my son's betrayal was a constant physical ache. He would speak to me with a strained, careful kindness, the kindness of a jailer for a prized prisoner. He was happy in his delusion, and I was the secret keeper of the truth that would destroy him. The weight of it all was crushing. I was alone, I was powerless, and I was trapped in a lie so vast and so bizarre that I began to wonder if I would ever find my way out. I was at the absolute bottom, with no hope, and it seemed no fight left in me. I spent the night of September 30th, the day I legally signed away my own life, in a state of profound and desolate emptiness. I was a ghost in my own home, a powerless spectator to my own destruction. Despair was a heavy, suffocating blanket, and I had almost given up the will to fight. The spark that reignited my soul came from the memory of my late husband. I was in his study, the one room they had not yet dared to touch, surrounded by his law books, his gavels, his portraits of stern-faced jurists. Richard had been a man of unshakable integrity, a warrior for the truth. He had spent his life weighing evidence and delivering justice. And I, his wife, was about to surrender to a criminal conspiracy without firing a single shot. The shame of it was a jolt to my system, a shock of cold water to a slumbering mind. To surrender was not just my own defeat. It was a betrayal of everything my husband had stood for. My despair did not vanish, but it was forged into something new, a cold, hard, and utterly focused rage. The judge's wife, the woman who had sat through hundreds of trials and understood the mechanics of justice, finally decided it was time to build a case. My first act of rebellion was a small, desperate one. I knew I could not use my phone or my computer. Sophia was monitoring everything. I needed a message to the outside world. The next morning, when the grocery delivery boy arrived, I pressed a sealed envelope and a $100 bill into his hand. My own caregiver was watching from the doorway. "I am so forgetful," I said to the boy, my voice a convincing, quavering whisper. "This is a birthday card for my dear sister in California. Could you be a saint and drop it in a mailbox for me? My daughter-in-law worries so much when I leave the house alone." The boy, seeing a frail old woman and a large bill, nodded without a second thought. The letter was not to my sister. It was to an old, trusted friend, a woman who had been my court clerk for 20 years, a woman of absolute discretion. The letter contained a single frantic plea for help and the name of the one lawyer in Boston my husband had always said he would hire if he were ever in a fight for his life: Marcus Thorne. My friend acted with the speed and discretion I had known she would. 2 days later, a plan was in motion. Getting out of the house to meet a lawyer was the next impossible hurdle. I had to create an opportunity, a medical emergency that would get me out from under the watchful eye of my caregiver. That afternoon, I staged a convincing fall in the garden. The pain in my wrist was real, but the disorientation and the tearful, panicked hysteria were pure performance. I insisted, with the unshakable stubbornness of a confused old woman, that I would only go to the hospital where I had once been an administrator, the place I trusted. In the chaos of the emergency room, while Arthur and a frustrated Sophia were dealing with paperwork, a man in a doctor's coat approached me. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice low. "I am Dr. Thorne. I need to take you for some additional tests." He was not a doctor. He was Marcus Thorne. He wheeled me himself to a quiet, private office in a forgotten corner of the hospital. He was a man in his 60s, with the sharp, intelligent eyes of a predator and a reputation for being the most ruthless and effective litigator in the city. I told him everything: the two Sophias, the forgotten wallet, the second driver's license, the art fund, the line of credit, the power of attorney. I laid out the case with the clinical precision of a judge summarizing the evidence. He listened, his face an unreadable mask. When I was done, he was silent for a long moment. "This is the most audacious and frankly brilliant conspiracy I have ever encountered," he said, a flicker of something that looked like professional admiration in his eyes. "They have built a perfect legal cage around you, using your own son as the key." He leaned forward. "This will be a war, Elizabeth. And to win it, we need to become more ruthless than they are. We need irrefutable proof. Your testimony is a start, but we need to catch them in their own words." On Marcus Thorne's advice, I returned home that evening, my wrist in a cast, and I began the most important performance of my life. I was no longer just a grieving, confused woman. I was a strategic operative. I embraced the role of the defeated victim. I was more docile, more compliant, more confused than ever. I apologized to Sophia for my paranoia. I thanked her for her patience. I agreed with a heartbreaking theatrical resignation to the sale of the house. "You are right, my dear," I would say with a sigh. "It is for the best. I am just a foolish, sentimental old woman." My complete and total surrender had the desired effect. Sophia and Arthur were completely fooled. Their last remaining fear, that I might put up a legal fight, was gone. They became arrogant, careless. Their conversations in the house, once whispered and cautious, became open and brazen. They believed they were speaking in front of a woman who was not only legally powerless, but mentally absent, a ghost in her own home. They had no idea the ghost was listening. My interactions with the at-home twin, Clara, took on a new, strange dimension. I began to see the deep, weary sadness in her eyes, the way she would flinch when the phone rang, the almost imperceptible tremor in her hands. She was not just an accomplice, she was a prisoner, just like me. My rage at the conspiracy was now tempered by a complex, growing pity for the woman who was its unwilling instrument. While I played my part, Marcus's army went to work. A team of private investigators began a 24-hour surveillance operation on both Sophia and Clara. They quickly obtained the first crucial piece of evidence: a series of long-lens photographs of the two sisters meeting secretly in a quiet park, exchanging a handbag, a clear depiction of the switch. The twin conspiracy was no longer just my word, it was a documented fact. The forensic accountants began their deep dive. They uncovered the truth of Arthur's failed business. Sophia had been systematically siphoning money from it for years, engineering its collapse. They unraveled the fake art fund. They discovered the existence of Sophia's lover, a wealthy, married industrialist in Zurich, and the offshore accounts where the money was being funneled. My own tools arrived a week later, hidden in a large, beautiful orchid plant delivered from a high-end florist, a get-well gift from my old friend. Nestled in the soil were two tiny, state-of-the-art recording devices. One was a simple, black USB phone charger. The other was an elegant, modern digital clock. Planting them was a nerve-wracking ordeal. The charger was easy. I simply swapped it for the one in the living room, complaining that the old one was faulty. The clock was a gift. I presented it to Arthur for the study. "I thought it might brighten the room, dear," I said with a vacant smile. He placed it on the mantelpiece, giving its pinhole camera a perfect panoramic view of the entire room where he and Sophia had their most private conversations. My quiet, historic home was now a fortress, and it was wired for war. My nights were now spent in the locked sanctuary of my bathroom, an earpiece in my ear, listening to the daily harvest of their deceit. The recordings were a journey into the dark heart of their conspiracy, and each one was a fresh, agonizing stab of betrayal. I heard Sophia on the phone with her lover in Zurich, their voices a smug, triumphant purr as they planned their future life together, a life funded by the sale of my home. "Just a few more weeks, my love," she said. "The old woman has been completely neutralized. Arthur is a fool. He will not suspect a thing until I am on a plane and gone for good." I heard her conversations with her twin sister Clara. They were not the words of loving siblings. They were the words of a master and a slave. Clara was clearly terrified, begging for more money, for a way out. Sophia was cruel, dismissive, and threatening. "You will do what I say, Clara," she hissed in one recording, "or I will make sure everyone knows about what happened in Miami. You will go to prison for the rest of your life. Do you understand me?" This was the secret, the leverage she held over her own sister. The most painful recordings were of my son. I heard him, alone with Sophia, expressing his guilt. "I feel so terrible about Mom," he would say. "She seems so lost." And I would hear Sophia's smooth, manipulative replies. "Darling, we are doing this for her. We are saving her from herself. This is an act of love." And he, my weak, loving, foolish son, would believe her. The house had a buyer. The closing date was set for 2 weeks away. The deadline loomed, a ticking clock counting down to the final, irreversible act of theft. Marcus's investigator, meanwhile, had finally uncovered the secret of what had happened in Miami. Clara, years ago, had been involved in a drunk driving accident that had resulted in a fatality. Sophia, who was also in the car, had used her cunning and her money to help her sister escape justice, covering it up, burying the evidence. And she had been using it as blackmail ever since, holding the threat of exposure over her sister's head, forcing her to be a pawn in her elaborate cons. The case was almost complete. We had proof of the twin conspiracy, the financial fraud, the secret lover, the blackmail. We had everything. The district attorney's office was ready to move. The final piece of the plan was laid out by Marcus in a secure video call. "The closing is the endgame, Elizabeth," he said, his voice grim. "They will all be there. Sophia, Arthur, and the buyers for the house, who will be undercover officers. We are going to let the transaction proceed right up to the final signature. We want to catch them in the final, irrefutable act." I looked around my beautiful, book-lined library, a room that was about to be sold out from under me. For weeks, I had been an actress, a spy, an operative. Now, for the final act, I would have to be the bait. The morning of the closing was a study in surreal, split-screen reality. In one frame was the quiet, sad woman I was pretending to be, a frail old lady being led to the final shearing. In the other was the retired judge, a woman of cold, calculated resolve, on her way to preside over her final, most important case. I dressed with meticulous care, choosing a simple but elegant navy blue suit, the armor of my former professional life, hidden beneath a soft, mournful gray coat, the costume for my current role. The car ride to the downtown law office was a masterclass in tension. I sat in the back with my son, Arthur. He was quiet, his face a mixture of guilt and a kind of forced, dutiful cheerfulness. He believed he was taking his confused mother to the final, difficult step of securing her future. He had no idea he was a pawn, escorting a queen into the endgame. In the front seat sat the woman I knew as Clara, the quiet, weary stand-in. She was playing the part of her glamorous sister, Sophia, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She looked terrified. She was an actress on opening night, and she was about to face a critic she had never anticipated. The real Sophia, Marcus Thorne had informed me, had been tracked by his investigators. She was not in Zurich. She was at a 5-star hotel in the city, waiting for the wire transfer that would be her signal to flee the country with her lover. But she had made one arrogant, fatal mistake. She had decided to attend the closing herself, to oversee her final, triumphant victory in person, swapping places with her sister one last time. She would be walking into a courtroom she did not know was in session. The conference room of the high-powered law firm was a sterile, intimidating space on the 50th floor, a glass box that looked down on the city like a god. The closing attorney, a man with a plastic smile, was there. The buyers, 2 grim-faced men who were, in fact, undercover detectives, were there. Arthur, Clara, and I sat on one side of the vast, polished table, and then she made her entrance, the real Sophia. She swept into the room, a vision of expensive, triumphant glamour. She had swapped places with her sister in the lobby bathroom. She was tanned, radiant, her smile a dazzling display of victory. "So sorry to be a moment late," she said, her voice a melodic purr. "Just had to take a final call from a client in Geneva." She leaned down and kissed Arthur, a proprietary, performative gesture. Then she turned to me, her eyes glittering with a condescending pity. "Are you ready, Elizabeth? The final step." I played my part one last time. I looked confused, frail, overwhelmed by the mountain of documents on the table. Sophia took charge, her voice a smooth, authoritative instrument as she helped the closing attorney by explaining the documents to her confused mother-in-law. Arthur beamed with pride at his brilliant, capable wife. Clara, the imposter, stood silently by the wall near the door, a pale, nervous ghost at the feast. Finally, the moment came. The attorney slid the final signature page in front of me. "If you will just sign here, Judge Sterling," he said, using my old respected title. Sophia picked up the pen and offered it to me with a triumphant smile. I looked at the pen, I looked at her, and then I looked past her, at the pale, terrified face of her sister standing by the door. I did not take the pen. Instead, I folded my hands on the table. The frail, confused old woman vanished, and the judge, the woman who had commanded a courtroom for 35 years, took her place. My voice, when I spoke, was not weak. It was quiet, clear, and resonant with an authority that made everyone in the room flinch. "Before I sign," I began, "I believe we need to clarify which Sophia Sterling is the legal beneficiary of this transaction." Arthur stared at me, his face a mask of pure confusion. "Mom, what are you talking about? What is wrong?" I ignored him. My gaze was locked on the two women. "Are we referring to the glamorous, jet-setting Sophia, the one who just returned from a tryst with her lover in Zurich?" I asked, my voice cutting through the silence. "Or," I continued, turning my gaze to the woman by the door, "are we referring to the quiet, sad Sophia, her twin sister, Clara Collins, who has been living in my home for the past 10 days, playing the part of a loving wife?" The room exploded in a silent, collective gasp. Arthur looked from my face to his wife's, to the pale, terrified woman by the door who was an exact replica of her, his mind struggling to process an impossible, insane reality. Sophia, for the first time since I had met her, was speechless. The color drained from her face, her perfect mask of composure shattering. "You are senile," Sophia finally hissed, her voice a raw, desperate rasp. "She is having a psychotic break. She is a crazy old woman." "Am I?" I asked calmly. I opened the elegant leather briefcase I had placed on the floor beside me. It was not a handbag. It was a case file. I laid a series of high-resolution surveillance photographs on the polished table. The photos showed Sophia and Clara meeting secretly in a park, exchanging handbags, clothes, even a wedding ring. "Then perhaps you can explain these?" Arthur stared at the photos, a low, guttural sound of pure disbelief escaping his lips. "And then there is the matter of Miami," I said, my gaze now fixed on the trembling Clara. "And the drunk driving incident 10 years ago that resulted in a fatality. A crime you committed, Clara. A crime for which your sister, Sophia, helped you evade justice, and for which she has been blackmailing you ever since, forcing you to participate in this monstrous charade." Clara let out a choked sob and sank against the wall, her face buried in her hands. "And finally," I said, turning back to the now white-faced Sophia, "there is the matter of the plan itself." I placed a small, digital audio player on the table. "I believe this is a recording of a phone call you made to your lover in Zurich, just last week." I pressed play. Sophia's voice, smug, triumphant, and utterly stripped of its usual warmth, filled the dead silence of the room. "The old woman is completely neutralized. Arthur is a fool. Once the house sells and we have the money, Clara gets her cut, and I am gone for good. They will never know." As her own recorded words condemned her, the last vestiges of Sophia's control evaporated. She was a cornered, feral animal. The doors to the conference room opened, and my lawyer, Marcus Thorne, walked in, flanked by 2 police detectives. "Sophia Collins," one of the detectives said, his voice calm and final, "you are under arrest for conspiracy, extortion, and grand larceny. The sight of the police, the absolute finality of her defeat, made something in Sophia snap. But she did not lunge at me. She spun around and launched herself at her own sister. "You!" she shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly sound of pure hatred as she clawed at Clara's face. "You weak, pathetic fool. You ruined everything." It was a brief, violent, and ugly struggle. The sisters, the two halves of a monstrous deception, were now tearing each other apart. The police moved in swiftly, separating them, and in that moment, the entire rotten structure of their conspiracy collapsed. Clara, finally free from her sister's control, broke down completely, her words a torrent of confession. "She made me do it," she sobbed. "She was going to tell them about Miami. I never wanted to hurt anyone." Arthur, my son, my poor, foolish son, had sunk into a chair, his face ashen, his eyes wide with the horror of his own catastrophic self-deception. His entire marriage, his great love story, had been a lie, a performance in which he was the only one who did not know he was an actor. He looked at Sophia, who was now being placed in handcuffs, her beautiful face a contorted mask of pure, defeated evil, and he finally saw her for what she was. Marcus Thorne walked over to me. "It is over, Elizabeth," he said softly. I stood up, the retired judge who had just presided over her last, most difficult case. I looked at the wreckage of my family, one daughter-in-law a monster, the other a victim, and my son, a man who had been so blinded by a beautiful lie that he had been willing to sacrifice his own mother to it. The truth had been revealed. But the cost of that truth was a price I was only just beginning to comprehend. The explosion of the climax was followed by a deafening silence. As the twin sisters were led away, their beautiful, identical faces a stark contrast of venomous rage and broken, weeping relief, the sterile conference room became a strange, quiet pocket of time. My son Arthur sat frozen in his chair, a statue of a man whose entire world had just been pulverized into dust. The truth had not set him free. It had imprisoned him in the horrifying knowledge of his own catastrophic foolishness. My lawyer, Marcus Thorne, was a calming, authoritative presence, managing the police, the stunned closing attorneys, and the unfolding legal storm. My first and only thought, however, was for Leo. While the detectives took my formal statement, my mind was on my grandson, who was at home, oblivious, waiting for a mother who was never coming back. The return to the house that evening was a surreal, heartbreaking affair. It was no longer my home, but a stage, the set of a long-running play that had finally, violently concluded. Arthur moved like a sleepwalker, his eyes vacant with shock. I, on the other hand, had never felt more lucid, more present. The judge and me had taken over, and there was work to be done. My first act was to take charge of my grandson. I dismissed the nervous-looking caregiver and sat down with Leo, holding his small hands in mine. There were no easy words to explain the inexplicable. I told him a simple, age-appropriate version of the truth, that Sophia had done some very bad things, and that her sister Clara had been forced to help her. I told him that they were both gone now, and that he was safe, and that I would never, ever leave him. He cried, not with the sharp grief of a new loss, but with the quiet, weary relief of a child who had known for a long time that something was terribly wrong. That night, for the first time in years, he slept soundly, tucked into the guest bed in my room, safe within the circle of my love. The case of the Sterling twins became a media sensation, a lurid, high society scandal that captivated the city. The evidence, thanks to my secret recordings and Marcus's investigation, was an overwhelming, irrefutable mountain. The trial was a study in contrasts. Sophia, the mastermind, was a creature of pure, unrepentant narcissism. She attempted to charm the jury, to paint herself as the victim of a jealous, manipulative sister and a senile, vindictive mother-in-law. But her performance, once so dazzling, now looked cheap and hollow in the cold, clear light of the evidence. The audio recordings of her phone calls with her lover, her threats to her sister, and her cold, dismissive plans for my future condemned her in her own words. Clara, her twin, was the prosecution's star witness. On the stand, she was a quiet, broken, and profoundly sympathetic figure. She told the whole sordid story: her past crime in Miami, Sophia's years of blackmail, the soul-crushing performance of playing her sister. Her testimony and the evidence of her own abuse at her sister's hands earned her a degree of mercy from the court and the public. The verdicts were swift. Clara, for her role as an accomplice under duress, was sentenced to 2 years of probation and mandatory therapy. She was a victim as much as a villain. And the judge recognized it. Sophia was shown no such mercy. She was convicted on all counts: grand larceny, conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, and multiple lesser charges. The judge, calling her a parasite who fed on the love and trust of a good family, sentenced her to the maximum, 25 years in a federal prison. Her lover in Zurich was indicted on international money laundering charges, his own life and reputation ruined. The machinery of justice, once it finally began to turn, was a grinding and deeply satisfying force. While the legal system dealt with the criminals, my son had to deal with the wreckage of his own life. His marriage was not just over, it had never truly existed. The annulment was a quiet, humiliating legal process, a formal declaration that his great love story had been a fraud from its inception. Arthur was a broken man. He was consumed by a shame so profound it was like a physical illness. He had been a fool, a willing pawn in a game that had targeted his own mother and son. He could not look at me without his eyes filling with the tears of his own self-loathing. We had the conversation that had to be had, a painful, necessary autopsy of our family's destruction. We sat in my library, the room where I had first discovered the twins' license, the place where the truth had first begun to whisper. "I am so sorry, Mom," he said, his voice a raw, broken whisper. "For my blindness, for my weakness, for choosing her, for choosing the lie over you. There is no excuse." I looked at my son, the man whose happiness I had valued above my own, and I knew that the old, easy, unconditional love was gone forever. It had been a casualty of the war. "No, Arthur," I said, my voice not unkind, but firm. "There is no excuse. You were a fool. But the question now is, what kind of man are you going to be tomorrow?" I could not offer him the simple, maternal absolution he so desperately craved. "Forgiveness is not a gift I can just give you, like a mother kissing a scraped knee," I told him. "Trust, once obliterated, must be rebuilt, stone by stone. Honesty by honesty. You must earn it back, not from me, but from yourself. You must become a man that you can respect before you can ask for mine." It was a harsh verdict, but it was a just one, and it was the beginning of his long, slow journey back to himself. In the years that followed, we slowly, carefully began to build a new life. We sold both houses, mine and my brother's, places that were too full of ghosts and painful memories. With the proceeds, we bought a new home, a beautiful modern house with large glass walls that looked out onto the ocean, a place with no shadows and no secret corners. It was a home for our new family, me, Arthur, and Leo. Arthur, free from the intoxicating poison of Sophia's ambition, returned to his quiet, scholarly passions. He took a position at a smaller college, a job that was less prestigious, but more fulfilling. He became a father to his son in a way he had never been before, present, attentive, and deeply, profoundly loving. He was a quieter, more humble, and infinitely stronger man. My role changed as well. I was no longer just the matriarch, the retired judge. I was a full-time grandmother, a co-parent, a source of unwavering, clear-eyed love and stability in my grandson's life. My relationship with Arthur healed slowly, over time. It was not the same as before. The blind adoration was gone, replaced by a more realistic, more honest affection, built on the hard-won ground of accountability and mutual respect. Today is September 30th. It is the anniversary of the day I signed the power of attorney, the day I legally surrendered my life to a lie. I am sitting in my study, a room filled not with old, heavy law books, but with light and art. On my desk, in a place of honor, is my newest collection, a series of intricate, hand-carved wooden sculptures from the Central Highlands of Vietnam, pieces of authentic, honest craftsmanship that tell the stories of their creators. Arthur and Leo are out on the beach, their laughter drifting up to me on the sea breeze. My son is a good man, not a perfect man, but a genuine one. And my grandson is a happy, resilient, and wonderful young man, a testament to the enduring power of a truth that was almost lost. I often think about my life as a judge, a life spent weighing evidence, discerning fact from fiction. My greatest failure was my inability to apply that same critical eye to my own heart. I loved my son so much that I was willing to believe in the beautiful, flawless performance of a monster because the story she was telling was one I so desperately wanted to be true. I have learned that love is not a blind faith. It must be a form of clear-eyed, critical judgment. True love, the kind that lasts, the kind that is real, requires a constant, vigilant appraisal. It demands that we look beneath the beautiful, polished surface to see the true character within. It requires us to have the courage to identify the counterfeit, no matter how much we want it to be the genuine article. My final verdict on my own life is this: the truth, when it finally comes, can be a devastating, destructive force. But it is the only thing upon which a new and better life can be built.